The most striking thing about the Kremlin's behavior over the past few days is the contempt Vladimir Putin and his gang of bandits feel for Great Britain. No signs of contrition have been evident, still less any attempt by the Russians to engage with the British government or to offer an explanation for their use of a deadly nerve agent on our soil. We have been met with a combination of angry denials, vituperation and icy disdain from Russian politicians, diplomats and state broadcasters. A Kremlin spokesman warned that no one should threaten a nuclear state. Putin himself, who as lately as March 1st boasted of Russia's new high-tech nuclear weapons, appeared to smirk when asked by the BBC whether Russia was responsible for the poisoning in Salisbury. Reliance Are the Russians posturing? I doubt it. They know that whatever measures Britain adopts, and those announced yesterday by Theresa May were fine as far as they went, will be limited because we fear swingeing retaliation such as the withdrawal of Russian gas, on which we have developed an unhealthy reliance. They also know the United Kingdom has run down its armed forces to their lowest point in modern times. We have become a timid, semi-pacified nation, while Russia under Putin is increasingly aggressive and warlike. Why should they take us seriously? And, for our part, much of our political and media class don't expect Britain to be respected. The other day, one of the BBC's star interviewers asked querulously what a medium-sized power like Britain could do when confronted by the might of Russia. Little or nothing, it seemed. Yet the Kremlin's bellicosity and the deference of many of our movers and shakers are perplexing. As my colleague Dominic Lawson observed on Monday, Russia is dirt poor with an economy smaller than Italy's. That makes it about two-thirds the size of ours. Why should we be in awe of a country with significantly smaller resources which, by the by, has a corrupt and inefficient administration? And why should Putin and his sinister foreign minister Sergei Lavrov think they can treat us with such lofty condescension? The answer is that although Russia is poor and ill-governed, it devotes a significantly larger percentage of its gross domestic product, the value of all the goods and services it produces, to defense than Britain does. According to the World Bank, Russia spends between 5% and 6% of its GDP on defense, while the United Kingdom struggles to meet 2% and, some would say, fiddles the figures in order to reach that modest figure. So despite having emptier coffers, Russia is able to spend between £44 billion and £50 billion annually on defence, depending on whose figures you prefer, while Britain shells out around £36 billion. Not an enormous difference, you will note. If Britain were able to increase its defence spending to 3% of GDP, it could easily match Russia, and after a time boast comparable military resources. As things stand, however, the Kremlin commands a much bigger navy and air force, though some of its ships and planes are long in the tooth, and an army at least 10 times as big as Britain's. Of course, we shouldn't simply hold up Russia as an example, but following its invasion of Ukraine, its blood-soaked intervention in Syria, and now its release of deadly nerve agents on British soil, there can be no doubt that the country is by far our most threatening potential adversary. But what does our government do? Does it reassess its historically low defense spending in the 70s and 80s? It averaged more than 4% of GDP. Does it show signs of appreciating the dangers we face? No, almost the opposite. Over the past year, there have been stories that the Royal Marines will be cut back and that our already depleted army will be made even smaller. The Navy continues to dwindle, and it's doubtful whether we can afford exorbitantly expensive American planes for 2 new aircraft carriers, one of which has already been commissioned. The top brass have lined up to claim the armed forces are at breaking point. The government responds by saying it is meeting the NATO target of 2%, implicitly pointing the finger at countries such as Germany, Italy and even France, which fall far short. These laggards should certainly spend more, since they are no less threatened by the Russian resurgence, and can't rely on American leadership forever. But it is wickedly misleading to give the impression that Britain is spending what it needs to on defense. Threat? Why can't our political class grasp the magnitude of the threat? Part of the answer, I suspect, is that nearly 3/4 of a century has passed since the end of World War II. Long years of peace have inculcated, in a generation unused to war, the assumption that it won't happen again. Collective memory of a major conflagration is fading, and one suspects that history lessons in most schools do little or nothing to keep alive the fear of war among young people who imagine the good times will go on and on. Above all, perhaps, our nice, soft, peace-loving politicians are unable to conceive that autocratic leaders wholly unlike them can be expansionist. Utterly immoral and an old-fashioned word, but the correct one. Evil Putin is a threat that is no longer in doubt. But our military planners, who usually don't look more than about 5 years ahead, have got rid of many tanks and withdrawn most of our troops from Germany in the reckless belief that Russia would never dare to strike first. Meanwhile, how proud most of our rulers are that our foreign aid budget of nearly £14 billion a year makes us the second biggest donor in the world. But even half that sum would help bridge the gap between Russian and British military expenditure. Prowess, how often have we been told that in soft power the lovely films we send round the world, our pop stars, our popular culture, our billions of pounds in aid. Britain is second only to the US, but soft power doesn't make any impression on bad men like Vladimir Putin, or, one might add, on President Xi Jinping of China, who it has just been decreed can stay in power for as long as he likes. If nations want to defend themselves against the dangers periodically posed by lethal states and by ruthless leaders, they need hard power, not soft. They must spend what is necessary to protect themselves, for pity's sake. That a lesson we learned the hard way in the 30s. When decent but limited statesmen such as Stanley Baldwin and Neville Chamberlain were slow to rearm Britain as Adolf Hitler built up the military prowess of Nazi Germany. I don't say Putin is Hitler, of course not. But he has shown he has no respect for other countries' borders. And now he has put at risk the well-being of British citizens going about their business in Salisbury on a Sunday afternoon. What happened 11 days ago was shocking and outrageous, but if it jolts a complacent and slow-witted politicians into facing up to the dangers Russia really presents, that wicked act will have served a great purpose.
Where the freaks at?